This is our 26th lesson on the biblical flood, and we're dealing this lesson a little more continuing with the looking at my book, and I'm going to put out a second edition of the book. It'll be more extensive, and I've even got another chapter that I haven't written yet. I've got two more chapters actually I haven't written yet, but I've got the materials ready to assimilate them and put them together. And we may not finish this material until sometime next year, because we will definitely have another 20 or 30 lessons, I'm sure. This will be our last lesson until August, and this is lesson 26 for us. In this lesson, we're continuing our study of the submarine canyons, and particularly the ice caps and how they occurred. Now, we'll tie the submarine canyons into this a little bit later. They were caused by, I believe, two different things. They are neither fractures nor rifts in the crust of the earth. So these canyons do not follow fractures, or they don't follow rifts in the earth. So most of them don't. There may be one or a few that do, but not most of them don't. Okay. My flood model set forth by me, I believe, explains these canyons in a very reasonable manner and a way that would fit to what we know from what we see in nature. Okay, most of the other flood models are unable to explain these canyons. When I started out to form my flood model, I looked at all of the problems we have, and I said, how do we explain these? And I set out to develop a model that I didn't care what other people thought. All I cared about was I was convinced it was right. And I drew some flack. I had some persecution. I had some that really attacked me because of my flood model originally. But eventually those people kind of quietened down after they studied it a bit more. Did. Of course, the atheist is going to attack it anyhow. But these were members of the church that were attacking it. Many of the larger submarine canyons are lined with the courses of existing streams. Now, this is right out of a quote von Engeln and Castor's book, which I cite in my book. Many of the larger submarine canyons are aligned with the courses of existing streams, notably those opposite the mouths of the Hudson and Congo rivers. But there are other places where they have lesser gashes in parallel consequent courses, like a pattern of rain gullies on a slope reproduced on a grand scale, appear on the continental slope adjacent to the Hudson Submarine Gorge. Now he's looking at the Hudson Submarine Canyon. These submarine canyons have just been discovered in the last 50 or 100 years, so they're not been around. They've been around, but they weren't known. If the submarine gorges, now they go on about Engeln and Castor, Engeln. If the submarine gorges worldwide in distribution, in other words, they're all over the world, are truly stream eroded, geologic science is confronted with the alternatives, none of which seem possible of realization. So what he's saying here is, if they're formed by streams, we can't explain them. Why? He's going to tell you why. One is that the sea level in recent times has been 10,000 feet lower than it is now. All right, that's a problem. The other is that the coastal lands of all the continents have been 10,000 feet higher than now, or possibly that sea level was 5,000 feet lower and the lands were 5,000 feet higher, or some other proportion of lowering of sea level and raising the coastal lands account for the 10,000 feet. Any of these concepts is geologically well-nigh fantastic, okay? In other words, they say we can't explain it, and it's fantastic to even contemplate these possibilities. My flood model explains them. Now, let me explain real quickly. If the flood was caused by planetary action and by tidal forces, the tides could have virtually emptied the basins of 5,000 foot of water, pulled it over the land, 5 or 10,000 feet of water, pulled it over the land. And then it runs back off the land, it could have cut these gorges. And I believe that would explain it quite readily. And again, we have a tidal flood, which of course, these atheists cannot even contemplate the possibility that occurred. That's their problem. It's well nigh fantastic to them. All right. It may be that in the recent geologic, they continue, past, there was a sudden and short period in which the density of the mobile substratum in which continents are isostatically floating became significantly greater. So he's saying here, it's possible that something could have pulled the continents and raised them up or make them to rise. Now, the problem is these continents are like floating. They're floating in magma. And so the continents have to be less dense than the magma they're floating in. That's just simple physics, all right? Archimedes' principle, basically. And so what we have here, they're floating. They have to be less dense than the matter that they're floating in. If you put a rock, if you put a solid rock into water, it'll sink because it's more dense than water. You put a piece of wood, most wood will float. Now, there's some wood that won't float. Ironwood will sink. It's more dense than water. But the simple matter is these continents are floating. Now, then the problem is the bottom of the continents, like the root on a tooth in our mouth, is called a craton. And the cratons are stable. The atheists tell us, the geologists tell us, that the cratons that we have now are the cratons that they had 4 billion years ago or close to it. And so the cratons, the things upon which the continents are floating, they tell us have been stable. Now, you would have to pull large amounts to raise them up. You'd have to deposit large amounts of light material like aluminum on the bottom of these cratons. Then if you let them sink back down, you got to take it off. Well nigh fantastic amounts of material to make it move up and down. But if the tidal water was pulled out of the ocean that went across the land, it would make it sink, and it would raise the ocean basins, and then they would sink back down when the water went back in. All of that would explain these what we call them. I'm having a mental break right here. I'm sorry. These canyons, it would explain them. Right? I've had this problem since I had COVID. I don't know. Still sticks with me a bit. The borders of the continents raised, and Engeln Caspian continue now, raised high above sea level would immediately experience the dissection indicated by the erosion of the submarine canyons, and the associated trenching of the continental interiors would be deferred until after the headwater erosion had extended the canyons across the width of the continental shelf. So that's what they're saying. But they have to have something to raise that whole continent up and then lower it back down again later. You got to put light material on the bottom of it and take that light material off it and let it settle down. And that's just ridiculous. However, if we take water pulled out by tidal action, it could cover and make the land go down. It would go up on the surface of the land and make it sink. And so it will do it. That would explain it quite readily. And again, of course, they can't have this because they're atheists. If the high stand of the continents endured for only a short period, and if the return to previous levels coincident with the present altitudes of land and sea was as rapid as the emergence has been, the submarine canyons are the record of an otherwise unattested episode in Earth's dystrophic history. I didn't look that word up, I'm sorry. So he's saying it's something we don't have any evidence of. Yeah, we do. The flood occurred. If such conjecture as of universal uplift of continents and lowering of sea level is regarded as too preposterous for serious consideration, he says it's too preposterous for that to have happened. Other hypotheses of the origin of the submarine canyons are no more plausible. In other words, we don't have a cotton-picking idea how this occurred. That's what he's saying. None of these so far proposed seem to even faintly adequate. In other words, we don't have any idea how this occurred. All these things are just ridiculous. They're too preposterous. If escape from the dilemma is sought by denying the current erosion origin of the canyons, It's necessary to appeal to faulting or slumping of a magnitude without parallel, different in occurrence and form from such phenomena elsewhere on the earth. We don't have anything like it. It's page 320 and 321 of that book by von Engeln and Castor. I tell you, he admits here they don't have any idea how this could occur. And what he describes, what would have caused it, will fit my flood model quite readily. Any questions or comments anyone has right now? Present evidence for the history. This is cloud. This is the Mediterranean Sea canyons in the Mediterranean Sea. The present evidence for a history of deep canyon cutting erosion all around the Mediterranean coast, however, powerfully reinforces other evidence for once huge reductions of Mediterranean water level. Now, we're going to go into the Mediterranean Sea and put some more evidence of this. And the original channel at the mouth of the Rhone is now a kilometer below sea level, and an even deeper channel was cut by a 3-kilometer descent from the ancient Nile, the Levantine Basin. So we have this channel cut in the for the Nile coming out of the Nile River and to the Levantine Basin. Here's the, and I'll use my mouse, here's the Straits of Gibraltar here, and this is your Mediterranean Sea. This is a picture from space. And there's Spain, there's Gibraltar, right in here, Straits of Gibraltar. I'll point out a couple of things for you regarding this. This can be verified quite easily. The water coming into the Mediterranean from the streams is not sufficient to keep it. If we dam this up, it would start to dry up, because the water, if we put a dam across here, then this water level would begin to decrease. It would begin to go down because of evaporation. There's not near enough water coming in from rivers to sustain the Mediterranean Sea. The water flows in this direction from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean Sea. There's a flow of water here. Sailing ships had to get a good tailwind, a good east wind blowing to get them out of this, out of the Straits of Gibraltar, sailing ships. Now, diesel-powered ships and coal-fired ships could buck the current. But I think the flow of this current's like 4 or 5 miles per hour. This current flowing into the Mediterranean just to keep it at the same level as the North Atlantic. And so if we had this blocked across here, and I believe there's evidence, and even Atheist say that it was blocked across here so that this dried up. This may be some of the problems that we see occurring in the days of Abraham and of his grandson, Joseph, that we see in the book of Genesis. That may be what had occurred during this time. I believe that's a possibility. Okay, so that's what we see here. This, of course, is Africa here. Over here is Europe. Okay, Asia is right over here in the east and here. Okay, here's another picture of the Mediterranean sea floor. This is the sea floor and how it goes down. This is pretty shallow right here, Straits of Gibraltar. I think the Greeks called it the Pillars of Hercules. I think that's what they call this here, Pillars of Hercules. Okay, the Greeks did. I think that's what they call it. I think that's Sicily right here. And this is, of course, Italy shaped like a boot. And over here is Greece. And here's what is now Turkey. This was Asia Minor in the times of the New Testament. Right down here is Egypt. There's the Red Sea. I believe this is actually the Red Sea here. This is the Gulf this is Gulf of Aqaba, what they call it now. They call this the Red Sea. But I think this is really the Red Sea of the Bible right over here, Gulf of Aqaba. Okay. Well, I got off on that, but right here you can see how the seafloors occurred. This was pretty shallow up here. And so if this dried up, some of this land here would have been people who would have been inhabiting it right in here. I think we have the Atlantis. I think Atlantis might be right out in here. This might be Atlantis right in here. And then there's some evidence that this right in here or this over here was Atlantis, and it was covered up. This is pretty shallow over in here compared to the depths over in here. It's pretty deep. So it has different depths. Now, let me point out, we don't give it in this lesson, but they found underneath 200 or 300 feet underneath the Mediterranean sea level, they found caves that people lived in, and evidence that people were living in caves that is now 200 or 300 feet below sea level, below the Mediterranean sea level. Now that means it was dried up. It had been dried up, and there's evidence that the Strait of Gibraltar was blocked after the flood, and this would be after the flood. And so it was filled with water during the flood and began to dry up, and that would have caused famine to occur over in here. It wouldn't be raining as much. They don't have evaporation, not as much water to evaporate. That could have explained what happened in the days of Abraham and Joseph. I'll refer you to the book of Genesis for your study on that on your own. We won't go into it. That's just a hypothesis I have. Okay. Any questions? Of course, here's Spain and Portugal and Spain and France up here. There's Italy and some of Greece and some of your other countries in here. Okay. All right. There's Portugal here, Spain, and this will be France. There's Great Britain. There's a map. And we have the Ionian Sea and Black Sea over here. Now, there's a Strait of Gibraltar here, and that's a narrow passageway. There's a strait through here going, Dardanelles Straits going into the Black Sea. Okay, we'll come back to those a little bit later. This is pretty deep, fairly deep and shallow here. So what we have here's what's called the Red Sea. And I would call this the Gulf of Suez, and this the Gulf of Aqaba. And right here, I say that this is really the Red Sea of the Bible. And you'll have to study that on your own, because the Bible tells us that Ezion Geber is on the Red Sea. So Ezion Geber is where my mouse is. And then so it tells us, and then it's on the Red Sea. Here's Egypt, of course, Syria, and what's called Israel now. Okay. Any questions or anything here? There's other countries up here. All right. Now, the Black Sea is joined through the Aegean Sea. It's joined right in here through the Dardanelles Straits, and through the Dardanelles Straits into the Aegean Sea, which flows into the Mediterranean Sea, part of the Mediterranean, Adriatic Sea up here, right? Now let's look further. Here's some of the structures. There's the fault lines in here. If this water dried up, then this weight of the water would let the land tend to go upward. And when it does, it's going to create some fault lines. And this is the orogenic is Oros is mountain, and genic is a mountain building, say, mountain building arc across here. Hellenic is Hellas is the Greek word for Greece. It's what they call their nation. And so right in here, this is some serious faulting areas right in here for geologic faulting. The Mediterranean Sea, one time in the past, now this is an artist's conception of what they claim happened, that this was closed over here. What they claim happened was, they claim we had an ice age, and a lot of ice was stored up in the oceans, went down in level. And then it rose, when it began to melt and rise up, it filled in this, began to come into this area here. I believe that after the flood, it was closed, filled with water, and evaporated because it didn't have enough flow in it to keep it at the level it was. And what happened then is we had famines and other problems over here because it didn't have water evaporate to rain. And then this level of the oceans then went upward as this water then is pulled out in rain and falls and goes down to the Persian Gulf and goes into the oceans. This water here comes out, and of course we have melting ice at the same time. And then that raised the level here, and it finally breached, and we have a waterfall that's like a mile drop in water. coming through the Gulf of not the Gulf, to the Gibraltar Straits. And the waterfall here was Niagara Falls is nothing compared to what this was. This fall would have dropped, they claim, close to a mile. The water dropping a mile as it come across this. We probably could have heard the roar 100 miles away from it. That's what the books claim. All right. So here it's dried up, and this is right out of some of the writings of these people. So what we have in some of these places in here, 200 or 300 feet down, they've gone in and found caves, underwater caves, where people were living. They've got evidence that people live there. So this is since humans. So they got human occupation of this, so they know this occurred. And the atheists claim, of course, that humans hadn't been around that long, but they do have evidence that they were living in caves here in these areas right in here. And there's further evidence that they were not living in caves, they're living out on the land as well. But the caves they found artifacts in underwater caves, 300 feet down. So that's what they see, and this is probably what would have happened. And this right over here, of course, this would be the Nile River flowing down. And right over here, then we would have had probably right in here was right in here probably is what was known as Atlantis. All right. Now, so the rainfall would have gone down and it would have dried up and we had drought. Okay. Any questions? And the water still flowing from the Nile would have still fed Egypt. The other parts would have had famine, but Egypt would not, because the rainfall back in the south of Africa would have fed the Nile River, would have still fed them. Any questions?
Are those videos of finding caves on YouTube?
I've got them documented already in my book. Okay. The caves that they found out. Have you found what you're saying? Have you found any evidence of caves in the Mediterranean Sea? I think you might can find it on YouTube. That's a possibility. If you find it, let me know. We'll show the link. Okay. Any questions? Here's some of your rivers that would feed into it. This is the mountain range, so they'd come out of Spain and France and right in here. But they don't have enough water to keep that full size of the Mediterranean Sea. If this is blocked off at Gibraltar, here's Gibraltar where my mouse is. All right. Now, what they're saying, the Zanclean Flood, what they call it, Zanclean Flood, you might find this on the internet. And it breached it and began a waterfall, started filling it up. Okay. Now, what this was going to do now, when large amounts of water begin to pour in, it's going to put weight on this ocean floor, the seabed. And that weight then will cause adjustment in isostasy and cause earthquakes to occur and volcanoes to occur. And that's exactly what we see, active volcanoes and earthquakes in this region over here, all around in here. All right. Here's and this is right off an internet site. And that's a cell, that's like a dam, that's your Gibraltar. And Gibraltar cell, and I'll put my mouse up, let you see what I'm talking about. I was pointing with my finger and I realized you couldn't see my finger. Increasing cell depth, and of course, when it covers it up and blocks it, finally when it breaches it, and the ocean level began to continue to rise. I think the ocean levels have been rising since the time of the flood. And it's going to keep on happening. And we may be accelerating it, but I think generally speaking, it's occurring in nature because of the waters of the ice caps are melting. We have to go back to how the ice caps were formed in our later ones. So this area here would fill up right in here first, then it would eventually go over the Sicily sill and fill this area up over here. So it would fill it up, and then it would continue over, and this would create times where more and less water occurred, and this breach would come across here. The water would come across and fill up the eastern Mediterranean. the Aegean Sea had a low sea level. The Black Sea wasn't connected to the Mediterranean Sea at this time. And I believe, of course, this is right out of some atheist claims that this was breached here. The Black Sea began to fill up with glacial water coming from glaciers that were melting. It will come back to our glaciers a little bit later. And eventually it began to flow from the Black Sea and began to come out of the Black Sea into this sea that we don't have anymore, right across here to the Dardanelles Straits and out into the Aegean Sea. And that will be deglacial flood. And they claim it's 7,600 years ago. I think their dating is wrong, but they got the wrong dating, but I think they got it right. The evidence is pretty clear, right? The Aegean Sea is part of let's go back and see it. Your Aegean Sea, right in here, is tied into the Dardanelles Straits to the Black Sea. But I don't believe they were connected at this time. Breached across here. Okay, that's what we see now. Aegean Sea, of course, is tied in directly to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what they're claiming here. And so the glacial ice began to fill up the Black Sea, and once it breached across this area here, began to flow across, and it would fill it up, and then breach in through the Dardanelles Straits here, and that water then would come out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean Sea. So we'd have surges of it. There'd be times when it would be low level, and then it would breach the Black Sea and come in and fill it up, and then once the Black Sea emptied and its level went down, then it started to evaporate again. And finally, at some point, then it finally breached Gibraltar, and that would take care of it and keep it full. Okay. Here's the Black Sea today, light blue, and here's the Scandinavian ice sheet and the Siberian ice sheet. This ice would flow into streams going down into the Caspian Sea and into the Black Sea, melting ice. We'll come back to the ice sheets and how they got there later. Okay, but these sheets, if you notice, the sheets of ice weren't as far south. Moscow's right over in here, and some of your Moscow is way far north, yet the ice didn't come down way down to here. So why did the ice follow this? Why didn't it go over here into other parts of Russia, what is now Russia? Very interesting. I find that very interesting. And my model will explain where the ice sheets are and where they are, rather than distributed equally across the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Here's modern countries. We have the modern nations, Georgia and Syria and Iraq and Iran and so forth, Bulgaria and Romania. Okay. All right. Now, it's not important. I just got these maps. Let's kind of see where we're talking about. Here's your Caspian Sea. There's Rostov on the Don River. And the Volga River, I was way up here about 250 miles north of Moscow on the Volga, Vladivostok in 93 and 94, 1993 and 94, I was there and lecturing. Okay, right. Here's the Caspian and Black Seas joined, and they were joined at this time, and this melting ice flowed into them, joined them, and there's evidence that they were joined, and then this dried up, and so they ceased to flow out of the Caspian into the Black Sea. And that flowed out of the Black Sea once it fills to the Dardanelles Straits into the Aegean Sea, into the Mediterranean. Okay. This was sealed off over here at Gibraltar. Okay. There's your Black Sea. The Black Sea has some very interesting things. It's a brackish sea, not saltwater sea. It's brackish. And what we see, the evidence, what we're seeing right now, it should already be salty, like the ocean. If it's been there for 50 or 100, 200,000 years, should be already a salt sea rather than brackish, but it's not. There's the Bosphorus Strait, and then the Dardanelles Straits come down here. Bosphorus Strait right here. We have two straits, Bosphorus Straits and Dardanelles Straits. So the Bosphorus Strait is very interesting here. Coming through here, we have the Bosphorus Strait and the Black Sea, undersea river. They've discovered it, and they discovered it in August 2010, about 11 years ago. And it's a current of particularly saline water. It's got very salty, flowing through the Bosphorus Strait and along the seabed of the Black Sea. So it actually, because it's more dense, it flows to the bottom. And the discovery of the river, announced on the 1st of August 2010, was made by scientists at the University of Leeds, that will be in England, and is the first of its kind in the world. So the water, heavy water, more dense water, the salty water is flowing below. And so here's a map of it. They show it, and they've made a map of it, and right here, the different colors show the water. This water then flows down and flows into the Black Sea out here. Now, here's the trick. The Black Sea underwater river flows at a speed of 4 miles per hour. They've discovered that, they measured it, with 22,000 cubic meters or 780,000 cubic feet passing through per second. That's a fair amount of water. 780,000 cubic feet of water every second. Black Sea has an estimated volume of 547,000 cubic kilometers, and a cubic kilometer is 1 billion, I guess. 1 billion cubic meters. Now, a billion in the United States is a 1 with 9 zeros after it. That's what we have here. And the word billion doesn't mean the same thing in other countries. Okay? That's the reason I'm doing this, because people in other countries probably listen to this. We got a volume of 5.47 times 10 to the 14th cubic meters of water. Now, a meter is just a little bigger than a yard, so it's just probably 600,000 or 700,000 times 6, about maybe 7 times 10 to the 14th cubic yards of water. Okay. Yes, you got to have to do a conversion on it, but I'm just Kentucky windaging that. This undersea river moves 1.9 cubic kilometers of salt water each day, 694 cubic kilometers of salt water each year into the Black Sea. That's a bunch. That's the cubic kilometers. And a kilometer is about 0.6 of a mile. The rate of flow would completely fill the Black Sea with salt water in 788 years. How's that grab you? But it's not full of salt water. But in 788 years, it would fill the whole of the Black Sea with salt water. In other words, it would be salty, just as salty as the Mediterranean Sea. But it's not. It's brackish. That's the problem. Not for me, but it's a problem for the atheist. Since the surface water of the Black Sea is brackish, it has not been occurring for several million years, not even for several thousand years. So we got a problem for the atheist, not for me. But my flood model will go along with this, no problem. Yeah. The sea level fluctuated as the volume, Ordway tells us, as the volume of land ice fluctuated. It may have been 300 to 500 feet. That's 91 to 152 meters, according to my calculations, below its present level during the maximum extent of the glaciers. So they say the sea level has fluctuated from 300 to 500 feet below what it is now during the maximum extent of the glaciers. On the other hand, if all glacier ice on the Earth today melted, sea level might rise approximately 100 to 200 feet, according to Ordway. Okay. And various kinds of geologic evidence indicate that sea level fluctuated during the Pleistocene, although exact amounts are uncertain. That is, if, for example, the channel, the course of the Hudson River can be traced seaward on the Atlantic floor for some 90 miles to a depth of about 240 feet. Presumably, such a channel was cut when sea level was lower. Similar channel continuations occur in associations with other rivers. But the problem is it goes down more than 600 feet. Some of these channels do. And so that won't fit this. Because they got, remember, they claim 300 to 500 feet. So if we go with 600 feet, let's just go beyond it. We have some of these channels that go way beyond 600 feet down. So we got a problem for them. Again, the atheist finds that to be fantastic. Presumably such a channel was cut when the sea level was lower. Similar channel continuation occur in association with other rivers, Ordway tells us. The explanation by cloud of the submarine canyons in the Mediterranean is the most reasonable. Now we're talking about in the Mediterranean, back to the Mediterranean Sea. It's the most reasonable explanation for these canyons, but it's rejected by some atheists for canyons in the oceans because their view of the ice age does not allow for the ocean level to be low enough to create all these canyons. Remember, they say it went down about 500 feet, but these canyons go like 1,000, 1,500 feet down, sometimes 2,000 feet. So we got a problem here. They can't get enough ice to do that in their ice ages. So they have a problem with it. Again, my flood model was having a flood that's tidal in nature would allow for that and create those canyons, create them just in a few days, not years or millennium. Now, Tarbuck and Lutgens, another book, steep-sided valleys known as submarine canyons originate on the continental slope and may extend to depths of 3 kilometers. Well, 3 kilometers is about 1.5 miles. Okay, that's something like a mile is 5,280 feet, so it's about maybe 7,000 or 8,000 feet. Although some of these canyons appear to be seaward extensions of river valleys, many others do not line up in this manner. So we got a problem here. Now, again, my flood model doesn't care. They don't have to be river valleys if the water's running off the land from a tidal flood. So it wouldn't have to follow a river. Again, my flood model explains them quite readily. Tarbuck and Lutgens further say, furthermore, since these canyons extend to depths far below the maximum lowering of the sea level during the ice age, remember 500 feet, but they go way beyond that, we cannot attribute their formation to stream erosion. These features must be created by some process that operates far below ocean surface. Now, most available information seems to favor the view that submarine canyons have been excavated by turbidity currents. So that's the claim. Now, turbidity currents, this is just water moving along this bottom of the ocean. Now, the problem with that is other atheists don't believe that turbidity currents can do it. Berkelin and Larson, and again, I cite these in the book, the origin of submarine canyons have been debated by geologists for decades. Current thought seems to favor subaerial erosion as a starting point for many canyons. Such erosion would have started with the lowering of sea level during the Pleistocene glaciations. That was during the time of the glaciers, okay? And subaerial erosion could not carve out seafloor canyons as continuous features because sea level has never dropped far enough to expose entire canyons. Yes, it did. It did during the flood, a tidal flood. The one exception is the Mediterranean Sea. So they say it happened in the Mediterranean, where the submarine canyons appear to be subaerial. Right? And so the submarine canyons were formed when it was dried up. Okay, water was running down the Nile River and these other rivers into the Mediterranean Sea. Turbidity currents are defined as a downslope movement of dense sediment-laden water. Now, that's how they define it. Tarbuck and Lutgens on page 310 of their book. Longwell and others discuss turbidity currents and state only a few small ones actually have been seen. We haven't seen them. All we can find is very small ones, and not enough to cut these canyons. Okay? Epsil fans indicate that great quantities of sediment have been transported through some canyons. That's Longwell claims. Calculations show that the volumes of sediment lying seaward in some canyons are 10,000 times as great as the volumes of the canyons. In other words, if you take the volume of the canyon out, you got a lot more volume. You got 10,000 times more sediment. Even if 10,000 passing particles had eroded only one particle, the passing sediment could have cut the canyons. So they're claiming that the sediment cut the canyons as it flowed through. But they're arguing for turbidity currents, which they cannot even find. Only small ones can they find. Now, when they look at this, I'm telling you, we have problems for the atheist. They agree that they don't have turbidity currents. When you study the turbidity currents, you don't find any to speak of. They're just very tiny. They're not a factor. In other words, none of their explanations will explain it. A tidal flood will explain it and explain why some of them are not at the mouth of rivers. Many of them are not. But they would be if we had tidal water, tides going over the surface land and flowing back out into the ocean. When the tidal went the other direction, tides move up and down. And I believe that's what happened. We also had melting ice. And we would have some of them cut by rivers themselves. That's why the ones that are at the mouths of rivers would be there too. So we'd have them cut at the mouths of rivers. And we'll be looking at that in August of, this is the year 2021. This is in May. And so we'll have our last class and we'll start back up in August. All right, do you have any questions? We'll come back in here.